Da, da. Boom, 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 boom. What's up, folks? All right, getting all the things going here. It has been a weekend. So we'll let folks get in here before I touch on the topic. I'm gonna try not to go too long. Hopefully, I just want to do a couple of kind of like short tips that I've learned from either watching other people do their fish rooms, or from people who have established fish rooms multiple times in some cases and have kind of told me some things that in the future they would do as advice to me, because eventually, I plan to do my garage as a fish room, but who knows when that's going to happen given all the COVID stuff, right? So we'll start with this. You may, in the background, hear some additional puppy whining beyond usual. That's this little girl. So normally Papalimo used to be in the same room where I have my desk, which is my bedroom. We did some swaps so that this girl is now up here because you recall, if you've been watching, like, I've had some puppy fights and some of them have like torn up my hands. She's kind of the fight instigator, so what we're trying to do is take her away from the larger space and give her a little more one-on-one time and work on some stuff. And then that meant that this guy, who will be a year old in 2 days, that boy is going to be a year old. He's in our downstairs where he's got free run of our living room and all, quite a bit more space, like half the house basically. And then that'll be going on. So he's almost a year old, and the girlies, they hit a year basically the end of December. So they're all very close in age. It's just we're kind of shuffling some stuff. So if you hear extra dog whining, it's not Papalimo this time. That would be this little girl, Shani, as we call her, but Shantoto is her full name. So just a heads up. Apologies if she gets a little loud. So let's talk on topic. All right, and of course, hi everybody. you know how those things are. But let's say you want to build a shrimp room or a fish room. So here's an example of a shrimp room. This is Nick's new shrimp room. That's Shrimpy Business. We did an interview with him last Tuesday in place of the stream. I can hear Papalimo barking at something, and we actually have a new video from him this upcoming Saturday. It's going to be a tip video, which I think you guys are really going to like, about how to be successful with shrimp. Or maybe you want to be the person who actually made me change the topic of today's live stream while I was scheduling it, because I got messaged in a place, and that would be this fish room, which is Ross, who contacted me and had a couple questions in regards to when you hit a certain threshold, when should you heat a room, and what kind of heater should we look at to be successful versus heating each individual tank. Which, I gotta say, this is a pretty nice picture of a fish room. I won't lie. I would be proud to have this as my fish room. It's quite pretty. So, with that being said, let's talk about a couple tips and tricks. Let's start first with the planning stage. Let's say we're planning a fish or shrimp room. No matter what the size is, my biggest suggestion to you is, once you have the space clear, do not move tanks in right away. If you saw the thumbnail, that's from when I set up my, like, what I call the grow room or the warm room at times, where I raise fish and do a lot of plant stuff. You've seen plenty of videos. That's where the guppy mansion is. I kind of put that thing together too quickly for its own good. I didn't plan. Plan. And one of my biggest pieces of advice, and I gave this to Redfish Bluefish, who's in chat, take some blue painter's tape. Okay? Let me get this up here a little bit. I know that sometimes, like, audio gets a little quiet, and I can only, like, push it so high before it does really bad things. So part of it's just I need to eventually change this mic out to something a little bit better for pushing audio without going too crazy. Anyway, so with blue painter's tape, you can literally tape out your rack space on the floor without having to move stuff around. You very quickly just lay out where you're going to put things and then see how much room you have to move. Can you get behind tanks? Can you access valves? Can you access power? Figure those things out. Planning is so crucial to having what will long-term be a very successful fish room. In my case, like, I have in my room downstairs, which eventually has to get torn down, right? Things are too close to the walls. So I have to, like, and you know, I'm a big guy. It makes it a lot harder. I have to, like, shimmy basically over a tank with my arms to get to the power behind, because the way that things are laid out is not smart, because it's a small space and I was trying to optimize space and my walking around inside it, as opposed to making it so that, you know, I might have a little less room to walk around inside the room, but have better forward going space and better use long term. So make sure you plan. It's super, super important. And this can include a lot of things. How are you going to heat your tanks, right? This is a question I got from Ross. Let's say, are we going to look at something like this? Are we going to heat individual tanks? Or are we going to heat the entire room? This is a space heater, which I'll put the link in chat, and we'll have it after for the replay for folks who are watching. Yes, it's through Amazon. Yes, I'm an Amazon affiliate. We'll do all the FTC stuff so they don't get angry at me. I do earn a commission if you were to ever make a purchase through that link for some number of days, whatever it is. Anyway, I make like 2 pennies on these things. I make nothing. I don't really care that much, but I mostly do the link so it's easy. This is a ceramic infrared style heater, right? So these are a lot safer. They tend to be a lot more accurate. They have good thermometers built into them. So if you have a small room, say 200 square foot, maybe even 300 square foot, having something like this can heat the entire room. Keep in mind your water is always going to be typically 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit colder than room temperature. That can fluctuate. Depends on time of the year, sunlight, how much equipment you're running, but we'll get over that in a sec. Just assume the water will be slightly cooler than the room. So if your room is going to be, say, 78 degrees, your water is probably going to be somewhere around 74, 75, 76, that kind of range, right? But just the space heater usually isn't enough. You typically want to have some fans as well. I'll get this out of the shell. We don't need that anymore, to help circulate the air around the room. Because if you just have the heater in one spot, you won't ever get it perfect, and one part of the room will be hotter than the other. So one of the things that we do to make this really effective, right, long term for a fish room, for your fish health, if we're trying to save some money, we're using some kind of heating unit. And if you've got a bigger fish room, like say you're like doing Cory, right? Cory's building stuff that's in the walls, where it's pulling air in and out of the walls to both heat and cool. But if you're doing, say, a small room in your house, maybe you're turning a bedroom into a fish room or something like that, you're not going to go quite that crazy, right? We don't need hardcore equipment at that level. But a simple space heater can do a lot. And then if you take fans and put them in the corners of your room, you can do it sometimes just one, but it helps to have cross, basically, so that you have like both. If you were to do this, you would want one this way and one this way, up high where the heat's going to rise, and then pushing downward, right? We want to push and circulate all that warm air around so that we can get the air as uniform in temperature across the entirety of the room. Uniformity is really, really good. Otherwise, we're going to have one part of the room that's really hot, and it might be significantly cooler for the tanks on the other side of the room because of distance and how that particular space heater detects temperature in the room around it. So having that airflow helps us unify the temperature throughout the room and make sure that basically every portion, whether it's a tank down low or a tank up high, is very, very similar in temperature, and keeping your parameters very similar. That's super, super, super important. Okay? Number 2, how are we filtering? If we're doing a fish room with lots of tanks, I would say, honestly, if you're at 20 plus tanks, go with air. Get a central air pump. Gemco makes good ones. The Aquarium Co-op carries a good one. Any of the linear air pistons. They're relatively quiet. They push a lot of air. Yes, they're kind of expensive at first, but if you think about it, one pump can easily do 40 tanks, right? And then all you have to do is have a PVC line that's your base filter up top, right? Or your filter is the wrong word. Your base distributor, right? You just build a loop of PVC, and you have taps in it for air, and the air just drops down from the ceiling. You want to get it up high to prevent water from going back up. That way you don't need like a million check valves. And you just have a line for every tank, or potentially even 2 lines if the tanks are bigger. Like say you got a 40-gallon breeder, put 2 sponge filters in it. If you do it that way, you can buy sponge filters in bulk that are a little cheaper. They might not last quite as long, but they'll still give you several years of work at a Gemco. If you want a coarser sponge, especially if you want like that green holder, you've got the Aquarium Co-op sponge. There's lots of options. Little box filters if you want to go like super old school and make it like you're rocking it like a 70s fish breeder. Just a little box filter full of filter material. You can do whatever. What matters is when we do this combination of heating the room and air filtration and everything, it creates this really good uniformity across your tanks. Also, it keeps your power bill way, way down. Way, way down. That might be the biggest tip. Do what you can to minimize your long-term costs. It might cost you more money up front, instead of buying like cheap Whisper 40 air filters and trying to gang valve them to a bunch of different tanks. You might be looking at a several $100 linear air piston. But you'll have one linear air piston. That thing will last you a decade. They last a long time. They're really, really nice. Especially the Gemco ones, and the Co-op ones are basically the exact same thing. The only thing is like Co-op's only been carrying it for 6 months now? I'm not really sure. I'm not in the full know anymore, but they're really, really nice, right? They last a long time. So if you part that out for how long it's going to last, they end up being very, very cheap in the long run. And also, because you're running everything off air, you're not running like a hang-on back on every single tank. Your cost to run your fish room goes significantly down. If you're going to have that many tanks, that's a lot of water. That's a lot of fish. It's a lot of fish food. You have a lot of costs already. Trying to minimize those monthly costs as much as you can is going to help you in the long run for success. Especially if your goal is, like, if you ever want to get into breeding for profit in some way, shape, or form, which me personally, I think it's really hard to breed for profit, especially nowadays. But it is still technically possible to at least get to a level to where you're breeding and selling enough fish to pay for your hobby so that your hobby is not costing you money continuously. You can get it to where it either makes it so your hobby is very, very cheap, or that your hobby is effectively free. And in that case, that's pretty awesome, right? Anytime we can have a free hobby and effectively like free fish and free supplies, pretty good deal, right? So we do that. We look at filtration. Maybe you got a couple larger tanks or something where you need to run like 1 or 2 hang-on back filters, or maybe like 1 sump on a display tank or whatever it might be in your fish room. That's okay. Just like you don't want to have every 10-gallon tank or every 20-gallon tank in your fish room have a little powered filter on it, because one, that's a ton of power you're going to be using. Just like we're trying to get away from heaters by heating the whole room, by using air across everything and kind of uniform sponge filters or breeder boxes, pick your choice. They effectively do the same thing. You're saving a ton of continuous cost. There might be a little upfront cost for some of the parts, but it's really, really good for you in the long term. My final tip here, and this is about longevity of a fish room, okay? And making things easier on yourself. After you've planned everything, you've planned your racking, whether you're going to build it yourself, you do cinder blocks and 2x4s, maybe you're going to go get some of the more professional knocked together racking, like those Gladiator racks or something else, whatever it may be. Make sure you select a tank that you can do as efficiently as you want to. So let me give you an example. Let's say I want to have a rack that's just for raising fish fry, right? I'm going to make lots of baby fish. I need lots of tank to raise them up away from their parents because they aren't safe with their parents. Say like rainbow fish, any of the egg scatter or something like that. If you're running a tank on its side, you get a lot less room and a lot less tanks. But if you run it on its end, you can fit a lot more tanks in a space. However, it's hard to work on those tanks if on end every single one of them is a 20 long. Unless you got like freakishly long arms, that very top row of 20 longs is going to be kind of hard to work on. You got to reach really far back. It's a 30-inch tank, right? So from here to there has to be 30 inches, and you have to be able to do it effectively. Where a 20-gallon tall, nowhere near as deep, much easier to work on. Yeah, it's a little higher. You might not be able to fit as much tanks upward, but you can fit more of them in that front to back space, so you can go linear, right? Also, make sure that you're not using tanks that are too small. If your goal is to raise a ton of baby fish, I'm going to do angelfish. Angelfish have huge spawns. I'm going to have hundreds of babies. Don't put it in a 10-gallon tank. Have a 20-gallon, right? Have something with a little more water volume. Give yourself room, and make sure that you have sufficient water volume to fit that many fish. And one thing that, like, a couple of different people was like, yeah, tanks on end can be tough to catch fish in. I'll give you a secret on that in a sec. Or more importantly, what Jeff Chambers is saying, tanks on the floor, keep in mind, it can be really hard to work on the floor. Yeah, maybe when you think about it now, like, hey, right now, it's easy for me to get down. I could lay on the floor and work in a fish tank. But let's say you hurt your back. I have hurt my back relatively recently in the grand scheme of things. And being able to bend over was a nightmare, right? So making sure that you have sufficient space to reach all the areas of your tank for whatever tank size you're using, and not getting a tank too low. Like me personally, I'm not going to put a tank below my knee. The bottom, like I don't want a top of a tank below my knee. I kind of want a top of the tank at like my waist level or higher. And I'm not going to, me personally, I'm not going to put tanks too high. So know ahead of time when you're doing that planning phase, what's the lowest I want to put a tank, and what's the highest I want to put a tank, and then figure out whether maybe your fish room isn't for breeding, it's just for display, right? What size tank do you want? Do you want all 40 breeders? Make sure that you're not getting the 40 breeder way up there and you've got like no room to work in it. And it's like the top of the tank and here's the ceiling. How am I gonna net a fish? How am I gonna put a fish in there? Right? Plan these things out ahead of time so that long term you can use that fish room to its maximum, right? That's really great. Let's say we're doing, we're going to look at automatic water change. It's kind of the last thing I want to talk about. Automatic water change can be really amazing, but it can be very expensive to install, and there can be lots of pitfalls. The biggest thing that I will suggest to you, and this comes directly from Master Breeder Dean, do not, with any of the PVC you're using, use just the screw-togethers with tape. It will leak over time. It just happens. Either glue it or get, I think you call it plumber's putty that goes in there into the screws if you're going to do the screw together. Personally, I would say just get the slips and cement them together. And then really, if you want to do it smart, anytime you're running a water line, use, it's the stuff that are like refrigerator lines. I'm spacing on the name of the material right now. It's the thin, like, white line, but it's flexible. Because if you're ever especially if you're in an area where potentially you could have earthquakes, if you have all your PVC on the back of your racks or something like that, or going to each individual tank, full PVC everywhere, that'll snap. But if you have just a PVC overflow, and then it goes into a soft, flexible line, as I bang my mic around, thank you, Buzzkill, PEX, you're the best. Using PEX lines to do things like that is much, much safer and far less risk. Strap your racks to walls, all that kind of stuff. Especially if you're in an area like where California, where you can have earthquakes, this is super important. The other thing to consider in water change, okay? If you're doing, like, say, a small room, you probably don't need automatic water change. If you're doing, like, a bedroom and converting it, you can probably get away with a Python pretty well. But what you might want is that when you put water in, all the tanks drain, right? Simply to an area, and then you've got like a small sump pump in a tank or whatever it's draining to that pumps stuff out for you, as opposed to having to drain every tank individually first and then fill it with water. Figure those things out. They're really important. This is why I'm going to hit on this again. Plan. The more you plan up front, the more time you take to planning, the better it is overall. And there's some stuff about PEX in the chat, and let me go over that just for those who might not see chat in a replay, okay? PEX is a little harder to install. Sort of. I think it's one of those things where, like, you figure out PEX pretty fast, and once you figured it out, it's easy. PEX can be highly sensitive to sunlight, as Redfish Bluefish is mentioning. However, most of us who are going to turn any room into a fish room, we're minimizing sunlight because we want to control the light ourselves. So, I think that's something you don't have to worry about. But if you are, just hide the PEX so it's not getting hit by sunlight, and it'll be fine. Right? Those flexible lines do a lot for you. And also, if you're doing, like, big drains, like you got bigger tanks, and this is just your drain, just use some flexible vinyl tubing. It'll do just fine. The braided stuff, especially where it's got the weave in, it's making it more durable long term. It's great. It's not very expensive. You can use irrigation tubing. There's tons and tons of things you can do, right? Pythons help if you want to do simple stuff. But let's say you want to do shrimp. There's a question about shrimp. Maybe your goal is to be like the shrimp room, right? This bad boy right here. If you're going to do a fish room and you really want to go that extra level, know whether or not you're going to use an RODI unit or whether you're using some other kind of filter, like a whole house filter, carbon block filter, one of those things, in order to pull out all the stuff out of the water, and then you're remineralizing it yourself to get it exactly where you want it, right? Know whether or not you're doing that ahead of time. It will save you a tremendous amount of headache, especially if you're planning to do, like, lots of fish. You might not need to based on your area, but if it's shrimp, we have a little bit more finite properties that we want in our water. We're in a smaller range, so maybe we need to pay a little bit more attention to that and look at what we want. Right? Maybe if I'm going to do this rack of neocaradinas. This rack is caradina. Well, if you're doing both, you need vastly different water parameters. You can't just pour water straight out of the tap for those, right? You're going to have to look at something like an RODI unit and mineralizing each set of tanks differently. So that might mean RODI units going into specific water containment units, and then you remineralize so that your water changes with a Python or whatever are done on your own. You need to figure that stuff out. I'm going to hit on this a ton. Plan. Because if you take your time, you plan out where you're going to put all your racks with some blue painter's tape, you figure out the type of rack you're doing, whether you're building it, buying it, whatever. Make sure you measure the inside of the racks. Don't assume that a 48-inch rack has 48 inches of tank space. There's legs there. That's not usable space. Make sure you remember these things. Then from there, you can start putting your racks in place. Figure out the tanks you want to use ahead of time. Try to be uniform. It helps you a ton. Trust me. It makes all the measurements easy. Get your tanks lined up. If you're doing auto water change, set it up. You want to run air filter, right? Linear air piston. Get that all set up. Heat the room. This saves you money long term. It makes a lot of things easier long term. Planning your work leads to success. And if you take the time to plan, that's the biggest lesson. This whole thing, really, like all these little fish room tips don't matter. Every one of them ends up being the word plan. Plan it out. Take your time. We want to rush, right? We fish keepers, especially those of us who have like multiple tank syndrome, we want to rush. We want that tank now. I want that rack now. I want that fish room now. But Instead of taking a week, if we took a month, we won't be looking at in a year down the line going like, man, I should have done XYZ better. We'll instead be going, I'm so glad I took that extra time to plan everything out, because now this thing is perfect. And it's going to last me for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, however long you plan on being where you live with that setup. It can last you that long if you take the time and wait and plan. Trust me, plan. That's it. That's the thing. I mean, like, here we go. Nirvana Aquatics in chat. I have to put this one. I've had a full year to plan my fish room. I have an entire spreadsheet and a payment plan. Thanks, human malware. That's kind of like me. Like, I've been planning a bunch, but I need to get the place that I want to put all my stuff, which I don't know when that's going to happen because of human malware, open, so that I can start blue painter's tape and everything. I got concrete in there. I'm going in with tape. I'm measuring everything. I'm putting stuff in place. I am figuring it out. I can't wait. Petsotics. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. What a great statement. That is pure truth right there. So, with that being said, that's my rant and my tips about doing a fish room. Starting from the very beginning to ensuring that you get success long term. And you'll see a lot of us fish keepers on YouTube. We're perfect examples of rushing too fast and not planning, right? And like, you can even look like Corey, now that he's moving, he's taking all this time to plan and build and do all this crazy stuff, right? But it's only because he's rushed into stuff in the past and learned lessons from it. Oh, yeah. You know what? This is a great... One last thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Mike, thank you so much. The Fish Tank Barn. Good to see you, buddy. Always plan for a contingency. What happens when something fails? Your linear air piston fails. You have a tank crack. You lose power. Do you have a generator? Do you have whatever it may be? Make sure that in part of that planning phase, right? Plan. You think of all the worst things. Like, I'm in the Northwest, right? I don't tend to get power outages very often. However, I do get them. I might get I've had one major power outage in 6 years living here. 7 years. 7 years now. Jeez, I've been here forever. As far as my current house. But I've had lots of flickers. Well, flickers can cause all sorts of issues, right? So make sure you plan for those things. Does it get significantly colder where you live? Let's say you're in Wyoming, where in the winter it's super cold, right? How does that affect the temperature naturally in the house? Do you need to add extra insulation to whatever room you're in? You're turning your garage into a fish room, you better insulate those walls. You better make sure you're not having that heat escape. Things like that. All part of your planning, taking those contingencies, making sure if you do use some kind of powered pump, a self-priming pump is your best friend. All those things, right? If you're going to have a power outage, make sure you have some type of like surge protector, make GFCI switches, whatever it may be. Make sure, because you don't want to have power suddenly pop something like your space heater, right? You don't need these things. And finally, because I can't believe I forgot this, even though I use them like crazy, deal with humidity, have a dehumidifier. If you are doing a fish room, have a dehumidifier. You will need one or you will get mold, and that is terrible. Will you lose a little water in your tanks? Yes, but it's so much better for you long term. You can mitigate that evaporation by putting lids on your tanks, right? That helps, but make sure you have a dehumidifier. Plus, it will help heat the room. So you could get away with never needing a space heater depending on your room, and your dehumidifier, if you do it right, could heat the entire room for you. I wouldn't rely on that, but it is possible. So, we'll get off the army of tips, right? There's plenty more. I probably need to make a video out of it, but I really want to talk about that because I got that question from Ross, which, by the way, Ross, thank you so much. From Ireland, nonetheless. Ross from Ireland, thank you. Who had a serious question about heating a fish room. Was it worth going away from single individual tanks being heated and heating the entire room, and what would be the best way to do that? We had a nice little short conversation, and then I basically had to run back to work because it was while I was on lunch. So, with that being said, we'll get into chat. If you guys have questions, just at Bentley Pasco. That makes it easy for me to see. So the first question, for example, that I'm going to hit, because it's just right in front of my face, from Streetwise, opinion on being able to get behind your racks. I think depending on how you design your room will depend on whether or not you need to be able to get behind the rack. So you might only need to get a little bit behind the rack and not completely walk behind them. Or you might need to completely walk behind the rack. That's kind of dependent on your setup and scenario. Like if you're mostly 10-gallon tanks and you're running like air from your ceiling and power from your ceiling, you probably don't need to get behind your tanks all that much. You might just need to be able to like get to the side and run your arm back there. Or if it's just 10s, you might be able to go over the top and reach back and figure all the things out, right? But if you're doing 20 longs on end, you might need to get behind your tanks. Jason, Redfish Bluefish at his shop, has it designed so that he can get behind tanks when he needs to, because of the types of tanks he's using. So it's all about what you're using. I think if you're using like 10s where you're doing lots of small tanks because you want to maximize the number of tanks and number of species or number of baby tanks you can have, it's really easy to reach behind a 10. It's 20 inches, right? They're not that big. But if you start doing like 40-gallon breeders or anything like that, I would try to make sure that you have access to the back, especially if you're a thinner person. Give yourself some room to get back there. You know, if you're a big guy like me, you might change your mentality on that, but it's really important, right? Being able to access the back in some way, shape, or form, especially with drilled tanks, you will want to be able to do so. Now, if everything is an individual sponge filter, you're not drilled tanks, anything like that, you might not need to access the back all that much, but it might be good to have a little bit of room to kind of wiggle in there one way or another. Just make sure that like you're not blockading yourself away from wherever your power is or wherever any of your lines are if you need to adjust things. That's the key and critical thing, right? Anything that you need to interact with in like a failure happens, or let's say you're only doing 10 tanks, right? It's probably not worth it to heat the entire room at that point. You're probably okay having a heater in each tank. But if the power is behind those tanks, make sure you can easily get to those, because if a heater permanently switches on or something, you need to be able to unplug it. You need to be able to get to it. Don't make it so you can't get to that thing. That's really crucial. Matthew Clayton, would keeping a large school of dwarf neon rainbows work in a bow front tank? Yeah. Just make sure you put lids on it. They'll jump. Have lids. And that's like one thing with them is you can kind of community spawn them where they're really good at, you can put mops in with them if you're planning on breeding them at all. If you just want to keep them, yeah, of course they're fine. Just make sure you have enough gallonage. Like if you're doing something like a 55-gallon bow front or something like that, yeah, dude, you could do a big school of them. They're small fish. They do great in larger numbers. If you have like 20 plus dwarf neon rainbows, they look so much better than they do if there's only like 6, because they do much more tight schooling work and the behavior's different and better. It's great. But yeah, bow fronts are fine. Just make sure you have lids. Make sure you have lids. It's any rainbow. Make sure you have lids, or just be willing to risk your fish jumping out and the heartbreak that comes with that. Some folks are mentioning that the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society's meeting is after this at 7 o'clock. Yes, it is. Candy linked it. Thank you so much. We're having Randy Carey on breeding scatterers. That's like tetras, danios, barbs. Should be a really, really cool talk. Feel free to go check out the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society's YouTube channel after we're done, because anybody can attend via the YouTubes. It's pretty great. Knight Rider mentioned, how beneficial is it to keep one kind or genus or style of fish? I think that's up to a person. If you are someone like me, where really your big motivator is a specific type of fish, right? I love rainbows. Rainbows are my thing. It probably benefits you just to keep that one kind of thing if you're super passionate about it. There is a risk that, let's say you are a angelfish fanatic or a discus fanatic, right? Are you certain you will be that type of fanatic 5 years from now, 10 years from now? If you keep only one kind of fish, you kind of have to make sure it's something you know you're going to enjoy for a long period of time. Otherwise, it might behoove you to have a little bit of space. You don't have to dedicate everything, but have a little bit of space for some variety. Maybe you want to have one tank where you kind of just rotate fish once a year. I personally am not a fan of that policy, right? I want to keep my fish until they no longer live. But plenty of people will look at it and be like, oh, yeah, I kept that fish for a while. I rehomed it to people that really liked it. Now I want to try something different. Maybe you want to do a new aquascape every year and you change the fish with the aquascape, right? I think those are really great in a sense of giving yourself some variety while the mainstay of like maybe what you breed stays the same. I think it's good to have something of each, right? I think that's perfectly fine. But you could be a crazy like Corey. Corey's a live bearer nut, right? I'm a rainbow fish nut. Gary Lang is a rainbow fish super nut. We're people that are never going to get sick of those things because we're always going to probably find something new in that genre, if you will, of fish that perks our interests, and we'll move it to a tank, or we'll shift some other things around to make a tank special for that fish for a while we're really, really into it. And then maybe it'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, now I'm into this different fish in the same species. And it's like, maybe that's the one I want to breed now instead of this fish, right? And that's how we kind of cycle through things and keep our interest going. So it's all about that one person. If you're that person who I only want to ever keep German blue rams, that's it. It's the only fish I ever want to keep. As long as you know that you love those things to death, and you enjoy breeding them, you enjoy raising the babies, you're selling them, spending your time, you're a shrimp nut, whatever it may be, as long as you know that like this is my jam and I'm never going to get sick of it, of course it's perfectly great to keep only one thing. It makes it easy. Now all your tanks need the same parameters, right? In a fish room, that makes it life so much easier if it's like, generically, I keep guppies. All guppies like hard water and not too much flow. That makes it so much easier because you don't have to do crazy stuff in every different tank, right? Me, rainbow fish. Rainbow fish generically like kind of the same thing in every tank. Makes it a lot easier. But if it's like, okay, well, over here are my angelfish, and then over here are my killifish, and then over here are my my hard water African cichlids, and then over here is my salt water. Now you have every different thing is a completely different parameter, right? That is making things a nightmare on you in the long run. It's a lot of work. But if you are ready to do that much work, do it. And just to follow up, just because you said, how do I know rainbows were the one? Okay, I'm going to try not to go too long on this. For me, like when I talk to people about like what new fish should I get for my tank, right? I get that question a lot. I think every YouTuber gets that question a lot. And my answer is go to your local fish store. Spend 3 or 4 minutes at every single tank in the fish store. And then keep in the back of your head 3 or 4 tanks that you like, I want to go look at that a little bit longer. The fish that are in it. Keep this in mind, right? Because it's not like most fish stores don't have super pretty tanks. Not everybody's green aqua. Go back to those. Spend 5 to 10 minutes at each tank. If you can, just sit there and watch those fish. Now, if you step away, maybe you walk outside, you go to the bathroom, you look at whatever fish food they're carrying, or lights or filters, whatever the heck it may be, right? Hardscape, you're going to look at driftwood. Which of those fish that you looked at that second time makes you go, I kind of want to go look at that fish some more? That's the one you should buy for your tank. The same approach can be taken long term as like, what's the fish for me? And the difference is this. Let's say I watch a video and I watch a tour of Lucas Brett's Fishroom, right? LRB Aquatics. We go through the shrimp, we go through rainbow fish, those mascara barbs. And 2 days down the line, 2 or 3 days away, right after you've looked at everything, think to yourself, of everything I saw, what's the thing that sticks in my head? What's the thing I remembered the most from that tour? Or you can do the same when you go to a fish store, right? What's the thing you remember most? Go back and watch that, but maybe watch it on YouTube if you saw it in a fish store. If you saw it on YouTube, find a fish store that carries it. Go see that thing in person. Wait another 5 days, a week. And if your brain goes back and like, man, I really liked that fish, that's probably the fish for you. For me, the way that I knew, I watched a tour of Gary Lang's Fishroom. And I saw Bozeman back when I was starting to get myself back in the hobby. I hadn't even set up a tank yet. I'd had this little tank right here on order. It was supposed to arrive in like 2 days. And I'd found a used big old glass tank on Craigslist, and that was in my bay. It was already downstairs, even though I had paid for that thing second, right? I watched that tour of Gary Lang's Fishroom from the Aquarium Co-op. And then I went and watched one from Lucas Brett's, and I watched one from Dustin's Fish Tanks. And do you know why I watched it multiple times, other than like I find Gary very entertaining? Is because every time I would go do something and I would go look something up, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to put in my Fluval Flex. I was really excited to have my first fish tank again. My brain went, I really like those Bozeman rainbows. I really like those Bozeman rainbows. They came back in my head every time, and I knew this tank wasn't going to fit them. But I was trying to plan this tank out, and all I could think about was Bozeman rainbows. And I would go watch more stuff about them. I went to a local fish store, and I looked to see, hey, do you have any rainbow fish? Oh, yeah, we've got turquoise rainbows over here, or we've got Australian rainbows. Do you have Bozeman? Oh, no, we didn't have any at our distributor. I didn't care that they had other rainbow fish. I only wanted that one. I wanted to see that one fish. When that's in your head that much, that is your fish. I'm telling you. It's all about that thing where being patient, that extra little bit of time, and figuring out what your head goes back to. Because that is what keeps it here, and you're going to love it for a long time. And sometimes it's a behavior. Sometimes it's like Shelleys and their cool behavior and the way that they exist, or mouth brooders and how they breed. You'll never know. Be willing to explore, but don't go like, I want to look at that fish for 5 minutes. Let's take it home. It's a fish and it looks kind of cool. Or this person said they like it. I should get that one. Find that thing for you that when you watched it, you want to watch it again. You want to learn more about it. You want to know more about it. You will fall in love with something. Trust me. Like somebody in chat, Cory Cats. Corridors, I call them wiggle butts. Because of the way that they swim, right? They got that little wiggle to them. I think of that stupid LMFAO song. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. Yeah. Every time. And I do that nearly every time with my Corys because I'm a weirdo. All right, so I'm going to move on. I went a little long on that one, but I hope that helps. I really hope that helps. Because once you find that thing you're passionate about, man, you go into a rabbit hole. But it's very rewarding. Trust me. It's super rewarding when you find that thing you love. Let's see. Jackson Tax mentioned, like, taking into account for your fish room your own height That's very important too. Yes, very much. Very, very much. And then also, like, thank you so much for all the likes, guys. I appreciate it. You know, YouTube algorithm, like, subscribe, share, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we did the YouTube thing now. Casville. Bentley, do you know anything about lava rock leaching phosphates? I've been planning out a lava rock skate, but the reef guy says lava rock makes keeping algae away harder. So right, lava rock is volcanic in nature, so you're probably going to have some level of something in it, and you can rinse the heck out of lava rock to get like little bits of sediment and stuff out of it, but you'll never probably get everything out of it. I think the likelihood, if you spend your time like soaking your lava rock or rinsing it really well, of it producing so much phosphate that it's a problem, is really low. I think you're more likely to have something else happening in your tank that causes that algae outbreak than it is directly the lava rock's fault. But yes, there is a chance that it will leach some level of phosphates. It's volcanic rock. It's going to happen. It will slowly deteriorate, very slowly over time from water. That's just things that happen. This is how we get all those cool cliff sides on ocean beaches and stuff, is the water over time is going to win. But in an aquarium, that amount of time is exceptionally long. We're talking, longer than we're going to live, most likely. So, potentially, yes, but I don't think there's going to be anything crazy as long as you do the rest of your tank right. Stephen P., I have that same feeling about puffers, but my LFS talked me out of the Shotodenai I wanted. Well, if you don't have the exact right setup for Shotodenais, it might be reasonable. But, once you get set up right, especially if you can, like, breed your own snails to feed them constantly, they're really cool fish. I won't lie. Another question from Caswell. Are there any rainbows that don't eventually get that tiny head, big body look? I find that very unappealing. You're less likely to see that out of the Maccullochi rainbows, which are a dwarf rainbow species, just because of the way that they're built. Some of the dwarf rainbows that stay really small do not get that super big body. And basically, you need the ones that look like Maccullochis in body shape. The other one that is not going to do that is the Melanitania species. They call them like Melandas or Melanda Gold. Typically, they're from Wallace Road, but there's a couple other locations. That's actually what's in the tank behind me. They get about yay big, and their head and body stays roughly similar in size. The other thing that you can look at is any of the Radinocentris. Radinocentris have like a torpedo shape to them. So do the Parkinsoni. They have that torpedo shape where the head and body all stay kind of the same. They don't get the big like humpback look to them. But there's a very limited number. There are some. The Madagascar rainbows are another one. However, most of your typical Melanitania, Glossolepis especially, get the huge humpbacks to them. And Chalatherinas get kind of that weird body shape. That's just going to happen. Rainbows do that, man. That's part of the appeal to me, though. I kind of like their funky body shape as they get old. They get the old man humpbacks and stuff like that. But there are plenty of people who don't enjoy that. So I can understand. I think that's one of the things, like, my old roommate did not like the body shape, but once he saw them in person, he's like, man, the color is just so good. I kind of like them now. Okay. S. Your name is always so easy. You having a good week? Of course. Of course I'm having a good week. Had lots of good news at work. I've also had lots of quote problems. They're us finding issues, right? Which is good for us because it means we're increasing quality. My lady's younger brother is currently in town here at the house visiting for a little while, so she's got someone to just kind of hang out with during the day while I'm off like bashing my head into screens. Yeah, I mean, I'm having a good old time. The only thing I have to worry about is eventually We might run into some snow here in the Northwest, which we normally don't get snow all that often, but they're saying this year we're likely to see a bunch of snow. And I drive a Mustang, which basically means I go nowhere in snow. So I got to kind of figure that out. I might have to like try and find a way to get a new vehicle on the relatively cheap. Go find myself like a used SUV or truck or something. I don't know, something that I can deal with for 6 months and then turn around and sell or get rid of, something like that. But otherwise, having a great week, and I'm barely started, which means it can only get better. At least that's the way I like to look at it. There was another question I want to answer, and I swear I missed it. J.R. Herrick, hey, thank you so much for the super chat, man. Thanks for answering my email about the Phoenix versus Fluval for my 55-gallon. You are most welcome. Like I said, for folks who don't know, I'm sure Candy will put this in chat, but my email is bentley.pasco@gmail.com. If you have questions, they don't get answered on live stream, you are more than welcome to shoot me an email. It might take me a few days to get back to you. Sometimes even a week. It depends on how crazy work has been. But I will get back to you, and I will do my best to help you out. Don't have to do super chats. They're greatly appreciated. I would actually argue that memberships are cooler than super chat. But that's just because you get emotes. And, I commissioned some cool art. I got more art on the way. But my artist has like a 2-month backlog. So it's going to be a while. But yeah. Justin Mosley, timeout. What Mustang do you drive? Year and motor, please. So I have a 2005 Mustang GT, which is the 4.6 liter V8. That's the first year that they did the new retro body style. So it's the first year where they went back to that kind of late 60s design inspiration. I actually had mine custom built from the factory for me way back when I got it bought. It was the first and thus far only truly new car I've ever owned. I received it with exactly 5.2 miles on it from all the test driving they have to do to make sure that the car is properly functional. And it is, it's a manual. So I'm in a lot of traffic, especially in the last 5 years, typically in the Seattle area, which is part of the reason why I should eventually move on. I do love that car to death, though. It is kind of my baby. But, it's a 15-year-old car. It's got almost 200,000 miles. It's cranky and angry, and it's a V8, so it chugs gas like crazy now. But if only I could afford a Tesla, that's where I would go. It's a freaking spaceship on wheels is what that thing is. But yeah, it's a ton of fun. It's a ton of fun for a car, but the weather out here makes it not as much fun. So Craig, just to answer your question, you are looking for GSAS.org. That is the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society's website. I don't know if we have a link on our YouTube page, but there's the YouTube if you do need it, if you want to check it out, because that will start here shortly. It'll be a little bit of meeting for like 10 minutes, and then the speaker will start. I highly encourage folks to check that out. It'll be pretty awesome. But yeah, let's get back to some fish. I'm sure there's a couple other questions we can answer before we run away. RJ's Place. Hi, I have an outdoor pond. It is still cycling fishless, but mosquito larvae. Any suggestions of another way other than manually removing them till it is cycled and I put fish in? That's a little tough. I mean, as the weather gets colder, they're naturally not going to be there. But if you're in a more like tropical climate naturally, that's going to be a little harder. As far as trying to remove them, with that being said, you basically have to kind of manually doing it. If you don't want to just put a fish in. The one thing you can do is you could put, like, assuming you're willing to do this, one cheap feeder goldfish. I know you're trying to fishless cycle, but you could have a single fish and those things will just go to town gobbling mosquito larvae when it's available, especially if there aren't like duckweed or something like that for them to eat. Yes, it gets away from the fishless cycle concept, and yeah, it is kind of buying a fish temporarily, but if you put a small fish in there, or a small number of fish, to where they probably don't have to worry unless you have like some crazy ammonia issue, which I would hope you don't if it's relatively fresh. A really small bioload in a pond is not going to affect your parameters too much, and they can help handle that for you before you start adding larger numbers of fish. It depends on the size of the pond and your end goal, but it's an option if you're unwilling to manually remove it with a net. Or just deal with it. Me personally, I would just deal with it. But that's me. I'm a weirdo. I don't mind a mosquito larva, so that's the thing. Jeff Chambers, is 2 AquaClear 110 enough for a 75-gallon with 3 fancy goldfish? Should be. That's quite a bit of filtration. Just make sure that I would be really, really certain to have a good ceramic media in some small amount. I'd actually really, really suggest, if you don't already have ceramic media in there, to use the Bright Water. It's the S or S Mini. I'll get you a link specifically, but stuff's super nice. I actually have been using it in one of my filters that I'm about to rip that filter apart because I'm very, very pissed at that filter. There's a link. That's the S Mini. There's also the S, which is the large size if you want some larger one, but I think the Mini is actually better. It's a really, really nice media. Just put it in a small filter bag or something like that, or some nylons, whatever. It's basically dust free. I basically didn't have to rinse mine when I used it, and it has really, really, really good room for your biological bacteria. All right, we got like 5 minutes left before the Sail Aquarium Society gets going, so I want to answer a couple of fast questions. I'll try not to be too long on these. Jeffrey Watts, what's your opinion on Samurai Sand, the small clay ball substrate that doesn't lose its shape? It's fine. It will lose its shape eventually. If you apply enough pressure, it will lose its shape. So, that's technically not accurate, but it's not supposed to break down. It's really good for shrimp, but I think it's overpriced. Because I feel like most of your other clay ball substrates last a very long time if you treat them well, and they cost significantly less by the vessel size that you have to buy a lot of the Samurai Sand stuff. At least the last time I looked at it, it seemed really expensive. Ninja Storm MC. I've heard that bacteria within the filter doesn't need much ammonia to survive. To keep some amount of it alive, no. But to keep a really, really robust colony, it needs a certain amount. It probably needs like the akin of 0.5 to 1 ppm being produced overall throughout the process of an entire day. But that's, that depends on stocking, size of tank, blah, 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 right? It's all kind of dependent. Oh my God, I found Nemo. Is the Bright Well, that's Bright Water. Bright Well is substrate and chemicals. Bright Water is filter media. But yeah, better than Eheim Super Media. I haven't done full thorough testing on it yet, but in the short term, yeah. But you know what? The difference probably only comes at extremely high concentrations of ammonia for most of our fish tanks. Get whichever you can get cheapest or is easiest for you to acquire. I just happen to have been using this really, really recently, and I like it quite a lot. I haven't put it through its full paces yet. That's just because I don't have what I want to do so. When I can, I will, and you'll know. Trust me. We'll go crazy on that stuff like I did with the Zis. DC Kyle, to the point about ponds, does water temperature affect aerobic bacteria and the cycle? If it freezes over during the winter, will it be cycled still in the spring? So, some amount of bacteria will remain. However, you lose a significant amount. So when it comes in, it's generally good to be really careful about your water parameters at first, but as the weather slowly gets up, you're probably not feeding too much right away, and then it will have its time to reestablish itself as it slowly gets to the warmer temperatures where you need to be feeding more and you need that larger, more robust colony. Gorsim, have you tried Biohome? I get asked about Biohome a lot. That's why I do that. I have not gone too crazy with Biohome yet. I think that it is overhyped and overexpensive, but I would like to take the time to actually test it and push its limits against other medias before I make a definitive statement. It's kind of like a gut reaction in what I've seen, that it feels like it is pushed by the people who stand to directly profit from it being pushed, and I'm not confident it is good as they say. Personal opinion, though. I want to prove it correctly. Okay, last question I'm going to do. There's like two about 75. So Clyde Saliba, what big fish for a 75-gallon Bentley? Bozeman Rainbow. If you're going to ask me what I'm going to put in a 75, Bozeman Rainbows. Specifically Lake Uter, because they are gorgeous. But there's a lot of options. That's just me. Don't ask me for fish. Go look at a fish store. I just talked about this. Go look at a fish store. Look at every fish in there. Figure out which one you want to go look at for 5 to 10 more minutes. Pick 3 or 4 tanks. Look at them for 10 minutes apiece. Then go away and look at some other stuff, or wait a day and then think to yourself, which one do I want to go back and look at again at the fish store? That's the fish you put in that tank. Bam. That's how you solve every problem with fish. And then finally, E-Littles. The 75-gallon that I have from the $1 a gallon sale is a bit tinted. Have you experienced this? Yeah, so most standard glass, not the low iron glass, has a slight green tint to it as you get to thicker glass. Sometimes it's slightly blue. Typically it is green. That's iron content that's in the glass naturally when they make glass, especially tempered glass. This is just going to happen. The thicker the glass gets, the more observable that slight tint is. To me, it's never really muted the colors of my fish. I pour a reasonable amount of light into most of my tanks, and it just doesn't work. It's impurities inside the glass. Very commonly, it is iron, but there are other impurities, as KG Cichlids is well pointing out. Whew! All right, that's the speed gauntlet. Guys, thank you so much for joining. Please, 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 if you're interested in the Talk with Randy Carey, go to the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society's YouTube channel. Candy just put it in chat. All about egg scatterers. It should be a really, really awesome talk. I'm going to have it on in background in lurker mode while I do some work. I've got some editing to do. But, guys, thank you so much. So much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. If you're doing really well right now, maybe you're not being hurt by Hillman malware, and you'd like to become a member, you get cool little things like a badge, some behind the scenes content, and you might even get a little discount code when buying my guppies from Redfish Bluefish. Who knows? We'll see. Not a promise, but it might happen. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome. Also, hopefully the politics are over soon. Take care, guys.